What are the subtle Caro-Kann pawn structure differences? Imagine sitting in a game where every pawn move shapes the entire battle. The Caro-Kann defense is known for its solid and flexible pawn setup, but small differences in how the pawns are arranged can change everything. These tiny shifts influence the plans both players make and how the pieces come into play. At the heart of the Caro-Kann, black usually places pawns on c6 and d5. This forms a strong central chain that challenges white's control of the middle. Unlike the French defense, where the pawn on e6 blocks the light-squared bishop, in the Caro-Kann black's bishop can develop more freely outside the pawn chain. White's pawns are typically on e4 and d4, but depending on the variation, white might push e5 or exchange on d5 early. These choices lead to different structures and strategic ideas. Let's look at the exchange variation first. Here, white plays pawn to e4 then d4, and then captures on d5. Black responds with c6 and d5, leading to a symmetrical setup. Both sides have pawns on d4 and d5, but white often gets an open e-file, and black has a semi-open c-file. This structure tends to be more balanced and strategic, with white aiming for central control and black looking for queenside counterplay. Next is the advance variation, where white pushes pawn to e5 early on. This move locks the center, creating a closed position. Black keeps pawns on c6 and d5 but aims to challenge white's space with moves like c5. The pawn structure here is more locked and maneuvering becomes key. White's e5 pawn can restrict black's pieces but might also become a target. Black often develops the light-squared bishop outside the pawn chain before playing e6, keeping options open. The fantasy variation introduces a different flavor. White plays pawn to f3 early, supporting the center with plans to push e for e5 later. This creates a more dynamic and tactical position, with open lines and potential weaknesses on both sides. The pawn structure here is less traditional and demands careful handling from both players. Another subtle difference is white's choice of pawn support. Sometimes white plays c3, sometimes e3. Playing c3 supports the d4 pawn and prepares for a strong center. Playing e3, on the other hand, leads to a different setup, often seen in the Slav defense, and influences how white develops the pieces and controls the center. Black's pawn breaks are also important. Unlike the French defense, where the pawn on e6 can be pushed forward to challenge white's center, in the Caro-Kann black's c6 pawn supports d5 but cannot easily advance to c5 without preparation. Black's strategic goal is often to time the c5 break perfectly to undermine white's center and activate the pieces. Understanding these subtle pawn structure differences helps players decide on plans that suit their style. Whether aiming for open lines or maneuvering in a closed position, knowing how each variation shapes the pawn landscape is key. Recognizing where the semi-open files are created guides rook placement and attack plans. Black's activity of the light-squared bishop and timing of pawn breaks can turn the tide of the game. In short, these tiny shifts in pawn placement and structure influence the entire flow of the game. Mastering these nuances allows players to navigate the Caro-Kann with confidence, making the most of each position's unique characteristics.